Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a really difficult, complex stack of source material.
Right.
It spans decades, different countries even, and it focuses on a trilogy of cold cases from Germany and South Tyrol.
Right.
And this deep dive, it's really about the unyielding, the relentless pursuit of justice decades after the crimes happened.
And our mission today is to go a bit beyond the usual story of, say, a lucky break. We want to focus on three very different ways these breakthroughs happen.
Okay.
We're looking at how persistence, combined with the huge evolution of forensic science, plus these meticulous physical strategies, and maybe most importantly, some very clever psychological tactics,
Right.
how all of that managed to deliver justice for victims whose cases were cold for, 27, 35, even 39 years. It's a really compelling look at how technology and human commitment work together.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit and introduce the three main studies that are going to guide us, because you're right, they each illustrate a totally different path to that final breakthrough.
Absolutely. The first case we'll dive into is the 1985 murder of a 15-year-old girl, Ulla Lilienthal.
Okay.
And with her, the focus is almost entirely on the power of forensic reexamination, how, DNA tech that didn't even exist back then cracked open the most critical piece of evidence.
And that was the murder weapon
A
itself.
red net stocking used as the murder weapon. Exactly.
Then we're going to shift gears completely to the 1981 murder of Swanhild S. And this is like a masterclass in crime scene reconstruction. Investigators didn't find the suspect with new tech, but they used this incredibly meticulous physical recreation of the crime scene. Down to consulting the weather service on light conditions, just to prove that the killer's alibi was a complete lie.
An impossibility. And finally, we'll explore this really compelling and, I think, morally complex case of Heidi Niederbacher and Petra Lunardi from the 1990s.
This one's in Bolzano, Italy.
Right, in South Tyrol. And here, forensics played a much smaller role. It was almost all about the strategic brilliance, and some might say the risky psychological tactics used by a commissioner to break the perpetrator.
Before the clock ran out.
Exactly. So you get this fantastic contrast between the power of science and the power of, human strategy.
Okay, let's start with Ulla Lilienthal. We're going back to January 1985, near Hanover in Germany. Our source material really paints a vivid picture of Ulla. She was only 15 years old.
And she was the sixth of 8 children living in a small town called Eisenhagen. It sounds like a big, loving, but maybe a bit of a chaotic family.
Right.
Her older sister, Bärbel Schäffler, described her beautifully. She used the German word eigenwillig, which is sort of headstrong or willful.
It's a strong personality.
A very strong personality, stubborn, but also deeply loving. A teenager who was really determined to find her own way. And tragically, that independent streak, it really complicated things when she first went missing.
And that initial timeline is so crucial, isn't it? Because it really dictated that whole first phase of the investigation.
It did.
On January 23rd, 1985, Ulla left home. She went with her mother to the bus stop. The plan was to visit a friend in the next town over, Grossberg-Wedel.
And this friend lived in a sort of youth foundation home.
Right. Ulla promised she'd be home that evening, and that was the last time her mother ever saw her.
And she did make it there. The sources are clear on that. She spent the afternoon at the foundation, listening to music, trying on clothes with her friends. She even ate dinner, Abendbrot, they call it, with her friend's family.
So everything seemed normal.
Completely normal. But when she left afterwards, sometime in the late afternoon, maybe early evening, she didn't tell anyone where she was going. And that is the last confirmed sighting of Ulla Lilienthal.
And this is where that headstrong personality you mentioned really complicated things for her family. Because Ulla would sometimes, stay out longer than expected without calling home, the family didn't panic right away. They actually searched on their own first.
They just expected her to show up.
Exactly. They didn't go to the police for almost 2 weeks. They finally filed a missing person report on February 2nd.
2 weeks. That's a huge amount of lost time in a case like this.
A critical amount of time.
And the devastating irony is that on that very same day, February 2nd, the day they reported her missing, 2 walkers found something strange.
In the woods nearby.
In a wooded area called the Sprilge Hedge near Grossberg-Wedel. They found scattered clothing, a pullover, and some pants just lying there in the bushes, not really hidden.
But at that point, there was no connection to Ulla yet.
None at all. They documented it, but the case hadn't been linked.
And then 8 days later, the investigation took that horrific turn.
Yes, hikers found Ulla's body. She was lying unclothed in a ditch, just a little bit off a path, near a parking lot in that same forest.
The trauma for the family must have been just unimaginable.
Her sister says no one could stop crying. Her father just immediately retreated to his bedroom, totally overwhelmed.
And the medical examination, the abduction, what did that find?
It determined the cause of death almost immediately. She was strangled air drosselt, and the weapon was actually found right there at the scene. It was a red net stocking, a net strumpf.
A red net stocking.
Yeah, and the most crucial finding really was the time of death. The autopsy concluded that Ulla died on the very same day she vanished, January 23rd.
So that narrows the window for the investigators significantly.
Massively. It meant that short period between her leaving the foundation and her death was the only time that mattered. But because her body was found unclothed, a sexual motive couldn't be ruled out, even though the forensics in 1985, well, they couldn't find any definitive proof of that.
So they had a weapon, a location, and a timeline. But they were already hitting walls trying to figure out who did it.
Precisely. And this is where the investigation starts to get really messy. And it all centers on that one piece of clothing they found first, the red pullover.
The red pullover. This becomes this sort of phantom clue, right? It creates huge problems for the police back then.
It really does. Ulla was definitely wearing a distinct red sweatshirt that night. And it was later identified as the one found in the woods.
And about a month after the murder, suspicion focused on a 16-year-old boy.
A resident of that very same youth foundation Ulla had been visiting, and multiple witnesses claimed they saw him wearing Ulla's red pullover after she was dead.
Okay, so that seems like an open and shut case.
It seems like it, but the interrogations went nowhere. The teenager gave completely conflicting statements. One minute he'd say he found it, the next someone gave it to him, then he'd deny ever having it at all.
And without forensic links?
That's the key. There were no fingerprints, no blood, nothing they could use in 1985 to physically tie him to the murder. So with the witness testimony being so contradictory, they had to let him go. Today, he's just classified as a witness, not a suspect.
But the pullover itself, the fact that it was seen on him days later, but then found near the body, that must have created a completely impossible timeline.
Exactly. It makes it so hard to figure out the killer's path. How did he dispose of the evidence? If the teen was wearing it days later, how did it end up back near the crime scene? It muddied the waters completely.
So that's a dead end.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that forced them to pivot to more circumstantial theories.
It did. One of the main theories involved a car.
Because of the location.
Exactly. The body was found in a pre-isolated part of the forest near a parking lot. So investigators theorized that the killer almost certainly had a private vehicle, a PKW, or at least had borrowed one.
Right. This wasn't a place you'd just walk to and drag a body a long distance.
No. So they speculated that maybe Ulla had been hitchhiking, or maybe she ran into someone she knew who had a car and they drove her out there.
Did they chase that car theory hard back then? What could they even do?
They spent enormous resources on it. But remember, this is pre-digital databases, so they were painstakingly checking local car registrations by hand, interviewing people who lived along potential hitchhiking routes.
Just a massive amount of legwork.
A huge amount. But every single avenue, from the pullover to the car, just hit a brick wall. They simply didn't have the tools to connect the dots. The case went cold for 35 years.
It's incredible to think about. They had the murder weapon, the stalking, they had the victim's clothes. But they just couldn't read the story those items were telling.
That is the essential difference. And luckily, in Germany, murder has no statute of limitations. Which is why, in 2020, the Hanover Police Cold Case Unit, the LKA, was able to reopen the investigation.
And they assigned a specific officer to it.
Yes. Police Commissioner Annabelle Valja has been on the case since 2022. It signals a real, renewed commitment.
And this is where the forensic deep dive really begins. The difference between 1985 and now is, of course, modern forensics. So the new unit, their main focus was re-examining the original evidence.
The preserved exhibits, what they call the airweight, specifically Ulla's clothing, and most critically, that red net stocking that was used to kill her.
But it's not just looking at it again, is it? We're talking about extremely advanced DNA analysis.
Oh, absolutely. In 85, they needed a big sample, like blood, to get a DNA profile. Today, techniques like touch DNA can get a profile from just a few skin cells left behind.
On that stocking.
Think about it. A textured, absorbent fabric like that. It's the perfect place to trace DNA from the killer's hands.
But how does evidence like that even survive for 35 years and still be viable?
That really speaks to the meticulous work of the German police archives. If evidence is stored properly, Temperature controlled, shielded from contamination, DNA can survive, even if it's degraded. And the breakthrough here confirms that they were successful.
They got a profile.
They got a profile from that red net stalking. DNA traces were successfully secured and analyzed.
So they have the killer's DNA. Now, the police have said that the exact connection is still being clarified, which I guess means they have a profile, but maybe not an immediate match in a database.
That's likely what it means, but they are actively pursuing new leads generated solely from this DNA. It's not guesswork anymore. This is science-driven. They can now check national and international databases, maybe even do familial DNA searches, which were science fiction back then.
And they're not just relying on the lab. In December 2023, they went back to the public.
They did. They put up posters, distributed over 11,000 flyers in Grossberg-Wedel, and offered a $5,000 reward for any information, no matter how small it seems.
It's that dual approach, isn't it? The science gives you the profile, but a public appeal might give you the name to attach to it.
Or it might jog someone's memory about that car theory, something that seemed irrelevant then but suddenly makes sense now. After 39 years, there's real hope for the police and for Ulla's family that they might finally get some certainty.
The lesson here, really, is that meticulous evidence preservation is just everything in this line of work. If that stalking had been thrown out, none of this would be possible.
A testament to the foresight of those original evidence handlers.
Okay, let's move on. If the Ulla Lilienthal case is about technology giving justice a second chance, the case of Swanhild S. is something else entirely.
It is. This one is all about the brilliance of human detective strategy. It's about meticulously reconstructing a crime scene to just completely dismantle a killer's lie. It's critical thinking over forensics.
So let's go back even further in time to August 23, 1981 in Neunkirchen. Swanhild S., she was 21, worked in a flower shop. She left her mother's house at about 11:15 at night for just a normal evening walk.
Which was tragically not normal at all. After a huge 3-day search, we're talking volunteers, police helicopters, the work, her body was found on August 26.
Where was she found?
In a water ditch about 18 meters from a district road. She was completely unclothed, except for, grimly, a pair of transparent knee socks.
And the brutality of the murder is...
It's horrific. She had been stabbed 63 times, and 44 of those stab wounds were in her back.
44.
And she had also been strangled. They found 2 different items used for that at the scene: a heavy calf rope, a Kelberstrick, and a white child's scarf.
2 different items.
Mm-hmm.
That suggests a real panic and overkill.
A desperate need to ensure she was dead. And a blood trail showed that she had actually managed to crawl out of the ditch, probably trying to get to a nearby farm for help.
But she didn't make it.
No, her injuries were too severe. She fell back in. The murder weapon, the knife, was never found. And despite a huge investigation checking all the men in her life, the case went cold for 27 years.
So just like Ulla's case, persistence is what pays off here. But the path to the killer was much more complicated.
Much more. Investigator Rainer Brenner and prosecutor Arno Waven restarted the case years later, and their first move, again, was to check the archives. They were thrilled to find her T-shirt was still preserved.
And they got a DNA profile from it.
A complete DNA profile. But when they ran it against the old suspects, there was no match. So the killer was someone who was completely off their radar back in 1981.
But Brenner, the investigator, he kept digging through the old physical files, right? And he found something, well, something very unexpected.
This detail is amazing. He found an old TDK-90 cassette tape. You know, the kind we used to record music off the radio with?
Wow.
It was just sitting in a box of old files. They had to find a machine old enough to even play it. And when they did, it wasn't music. It was an anonymous emergency call, a tip from years ago.
And on that tape...
On that scratchy old tape, an anonymous woman named a man who had been completely overlooked. Ferdinand H. He was a 21-year-old road worker, lived in the same town, but was never part of the initial investigation.
So that dusty old tape gave them a name to go with their new DNA profile.
Exactly. It shows you, technology gives you the proof, but sometimes you still need that old-school analog crew to point you in the right direction.
So they call Ferdinand H. in for questioning. The strategy here must have been crucial. They had the DNA, but they wanted to see his reaction first.
Right, and they showed him a standard neutral passport photo of Swanhild. Not a graphic crime scene photo, just her.
And his reaction was intense.
Visceral. The sources say he started to gag violently. They had to hand him a wastebasket. Now, for someone who claims they don't know the victim, That's a very, very suspicious reaction.
An immediate psychological crack.
A huge one. So, of course, they asked for a voluntary saliva sample, and within days it was confirmed. The DNA from the T-shirt was a perfect match for Ferdinand H.
So he's arrested. Now he has to explain how his DNA got on her T-shirt.
And he comes up with a very specific, very detailed alibi. He claimed he was driving past during that 3-day search period, and he saw a coat hanging on a guidepost, a light faucet.
Which piqued his curiosity.
Right. So he says he stopped his car, followed some unseen path into a field, found the body, and must have accidentally touched something, transferring his DNA.
That's plausible enough to create reasonable doubt, I suppose.
It is. And the investigators, Wieben and Brenner, they knew they had to prove that story was a complete impossibility. They couldn't just rely on the DNA.
Which led to this incredible crime scene reconstruction.
One of the most compelling investigative moves I've ever read about. They decided to recreate the discovery night down to the tiniest detail.
They even consulted the German Weather Service.
They did, to confirm the exact light conditions for that night in August 1981. And they confirmed the area was pitch black. Rural, no ambient light, nothing.
So they set up a dummy, put the code on the post, and they started driving.
In modern police cars, mind you, with much better xenon headlights than Ferdinand's car from 1981. They drove past multiple times, and the result was definitive.
They couldn't see the code.
They could not see the coat hanging on the guidepost, not at all. But they didn't stop there. They parked the cars and got out into that absolute darkness. The field path, he described. It was totally invisible. They walked the 18 meters to where the body was. They said the experience was deeply unsettling, unheimlich, like walking in a pitch-black room.
They put themselves in the shoes of the supposed innocent discoverer.
And proved it was impossible. When they finally turned on the floodlights, Wieben and Brenner just looked at each other. They knew.
He was lying.
It was physically, visually, environmentally impossible for him to have done what he claimed. His entire story was a lie designed to explain away the DNA.
But the defense still had one powerful question they could use. With 63 stab wounds, why were there no defensive wounds? Why didn't she fight back?
This was the most confusing piece of the puzzle for the prosecution. And the answer, unbelievably, was also found in the archives, in a letter Swanhild had written in 1978, 3 years before she died.
A letter from her.
Yes, she was recounting a previous sexual assault she had endured while visiting America or Canada.
What did she write? It must have been an incredible moment for the investigators.
It must have been. She wrote, "He didn't hurt me. I didn't resist because I know many girls who fight and scream are killed."
Oh my God. That changes everything.
It reframes her completely, not as a passive victim, but as a calm, considered, clever woman who, based on past trauma, made a calculated, rational decision to not resist, thinking it was her best survival strategy.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. But it provided the court with a compelling explanation for the lack of defensive wounds. The prosecution was able to use her own words to show her character and mindset.
So now they have everything. The DNA, the busted alibi from the reconstruction, the letter. But they still hit a legal snag.
A huge one. The district court initially rejected the indictment. They lifted the arrest warrant, saying the evidence was insufficient. The prosecutor called it a klatsche smack in the face.
How is that even possible?
It just shows you the high bar in German criminal law. But they appealed immediately to the higher regional court, which overturned the rejection and opened the trial.
And they did the reconstruction again, right?
They did. But this time, they brought the judges and the accused to the scene. They put them in the police vans in the pitch-black darkness. Having them experience it for themselves was the final critical step.
And the court found him guilty.
Guilty of murder. They concluded he encountered her randomly, assaulted her, and then killed her because he was afraid she would recognize him. He was sentenced to life in prison. That human-driven reconstruction, that was the key that locked the door on him.
Incredible. So now we shift entirely from physical evidence and reconstruction to pure psychology.
Right. To the power of strategic police work and the morally complex tightrope you have to walk to get a confession under pressure. We're going to Bolzano, South Tyrol, in the mid-1990s.
And this case, it feels like it's driven almost entirely by the gut feeling and the psychological skill of one man. Commissioner Dr. Alexander Zelger.
Absolutely. The first victim was Heidi Niederbacher. She was a 32-year-old prostitute working near the Bolzano train station. On October 23, 1995, she told her colleagues she had a meeting with a man named Eric. And then she just vanished.
Her colleagues were immediately worried. They had a bad feeling and went straight to the police.
And Zilger was alerted by this very insistent duty inspector. He described her as tenacious. She told him in Italian, Dottore, le successo qualcosa ne sono sicura. Doctor, something has happened to her, I am sure of it.
And I quickly figured out who Eric was.
Yes. His real name was Ernst Schrott. He was 51, a day laborer, described as unkempt, barely educated, just very socially marginal. He was known to frequent Heidi, and he lived in this crude wooden shack near Bolzano with no electricity or water.
A very isolated individual.
Extremely. And that simplicity, that detachment from normal society, became a critical factor in how Zellger decided to interrogate him.
So when the investigators went to his shack, they were shocked by what they found.
They described it as a Mulholde, a garbage dump, just filled with dirt, plastic, or rotting food. It was a place where things, and maybe people, went to be forgotten.
And Schrott, he admitted knowing Heidi, but said she just disappeared.
Right. He called her his friend, said he was going to marry her. He acted totally bewildered. But while he was talking, one of the officers noticed something in the garbage. A small piece of leather and a note with a different name on it. Petra Lunardi.
And this set off huge alarm bells.
Massive ones. Petra Lunardi was another prostitute, 29 years old, who had been missing since February 1993, 2 years before Heidi.
So now they're thinking they have a serial pattern.
Exactly. Zellger immediately got a search warrant, and during the search they found some of Heidi's belongings, but the crucial find was Petra Lunardi's old, thick prescription glasses.
Glasses.
The significance of this can't be overstated. Petra had terrible eyesight. She literally could not function without these glasses. Finding them in his shack was undeniable proof that she had been there and that something terrible had happened to her. She didn't just run away.
So Zellger brings Schrott in for questioning, but he's under immense time pressure.
Huge pressure. The search teams were out looking for the bodies, but they'd have to stop at nightfall. If they didn't find a body, Zellger would have to legally release Schrott. And he knew Schrott would just disappear back into the margins. The clock was ticking.
And Schrott just kept denying everything.
Like a broken record. No matter what Zellger asked him, about Heidi, about Petra, about the glasses, the answer was always the same. Denial. And that just confirmed Zellger's suspicion.
So the standard interrogation wasn't working. Zellger realized he had to pivot.
Completely. He abandoned the facts and the evidence and switched to a raw, empathy-based approach. He decided to target Schrott's deepest psychological wound.
He started suggesting that maybe Heidi and Petra had been mean to him.
That they had betrayed his trust, and that struck the nerve. Schrott finally looked up and engaged. He confirmed they had been cruel, they'd promised him things, companionship, marriage, the fantasies he clung to, and then they abandoned him as soon as he paid them.
So the motive wasn't just violence. It was this deep sense of rejection.
And betrayal. Zellger now had the emotional key.
And this is where he takes a massive, career-risking gamble.
A huge one. He looked Schrott right in the eyes and made this calculated promise. He said, Ernst, I promise you will not go to jail today if you tell me where we can find them.
Zellger himself knew this was an impossible promise.
Right. The sources say he immediately thought to himself, am I crazy? If he confesses to murder, I have to arrest him. But he went with it, knowing it was the only way to get the truth before nightfall. It was a calculated deception to recover the bodies.
And it worked.
It paid off spectacularly. Schrott broke. He started with Petra Lunardi from 1993. He said they fought in his little transporter vehicle. She tried to leave after he paid her, and he struck her. She lost consciousness, her glasses broke on the floor.
Did he know if she was dead?
He said he didn't even check. He panicked. He dragged her body, his words, like a sack of potatoes, and threw her over a bridge into a creek that was swollen with rain. Zellger knew instantly her body was likely lost forever, carried away into the Isaac River.
But he still needed the confession for Heidi.
And he got it. Schrott confessed he'd also hit Heidi in October 95, thinking he struck her too hard and killed her instantly. He said he covered her body with heavy stones in the riverbed of a different creek, the Finsterbach.
And he led them to the body.
He did. He took Zellger and the search teams right to the spot, and they recovered Heidi Niederbacher's body. They had the corpus delicti they needed for a conviction.
So now comes the dramatic part. Zellger has the confession, he has the body, but he's determined to honor his promise that Schrott would not go to jail today.
He had to perform a piece of theater, really, to get around the law? When they got back to the station, Schrott was visibly distressed. Zellger seized the opportunity. He dramatically suggested that Schrott looked dizzy, like he was about to faint.
He basically coached him into it.
He did. And Schrott immediately complied, collapsing on the floor, pretending to be unconscious.
So because he was now medical emergency.
He was taken to the hospital under police guard, of course, but technically he wasn't taken to jail. It delayed the formal booking until the next morning. Zelger upheld his promise.
What was the final legal outcome?
In 1996, Ernst Schrott was convicted of manslaughter Totschlag for Heidi's death and got 12.5 years. But because they never found Petra Lunardi's body, he could not be convicted in her case. Her death, as the source material notes, remains unavenged by the law. Ernst Schrott is no longer alive.
It's just a powerful ending. It highlights the incredible moral complexities detectives face when they have to choose between the letter of the law and getting the truth that brings a family closure.
Yeah, and if we tie this all together, these three cases, they give you this perfect cross-section of how cold cases get solved, each one using a totally different core strategy.
Exactly. With Ulla, it was all about the technology, the persistent re-examination of that decades-old evidence, the air weight, and the power of modern DNA. A purely technological breakthrough.
And then you have Swanhild S., where technology found the suspect, but it was human strategy, that meticulous physical reconstruction in the absolute darkness that actually proved he was lying, and her own words from that letter providing the critical context.
And finally, Heidi and Petra, where the human element was everything. Commissioner Zelger's deep understanding of his suspect's psychology and his willingness to walk that moral tightrope with a calculated promise. That was the entire mechanism for justice.
And you can't forget the commitment of the victims' families through all those years, coupled with investigators who were willing to use these, unconventional methods, whether forensic or psychological. It ensured that, at the end of the day, critical thinking won out over decades of deception.
So what does this all mean for us? We often think the solution to every cold case is some new technology, a new database. But these sources, they really reveal that persistence and detective strategy, like a judge visiting a crime scene in the dark or that promise of no jail today, are just as crucial as the science.
Which leaves an important question for you, the listener, to think about, especially with that Bolzano case. Zelger secured justice for Heidi. He recovered her body, but he had to use questionable methods to do it. Petra Lunardi's killer, meanwhile, went unpunished by the law because of a lack of evidence. So does justice achieved through a kind of moral deception carry more weight than the incomplete justice that fails because the rules were strictly followed? It's a question of results versus methods, and it's something that's still intensely debated in police work around the world.